Welcome to the show. I'm your host, John DeBona, and I'm glad you're here. This is where we cut through the noise and chaos to break down the real issues affecting our country. We don't sugarcoat it either. We get straight to the heart of what's going on and how it impacts you. Project 2025 is not just another political agenda. It's an authoritarian blueprint to reshape America in the worst way possible. And trust me, it's more extreme than you've ever seen before. We must resist this dangerous push towards authoritarianism because Project 2025 isn't just policy, it's an existential threat to our democracy. Now, let's be clear. Project 2025 is not about reform, it's about control. It's a rebranding of the same dangerous ideas we've been fighting against, but now they're even more radical, more authoritarian, and more dangerous. We're going to break it down so you understand exactly what's at stake, and by the end of this video, we'll give you the steps you need to take to resist. But before we dive in, head over to your favorite social media platform and search for Turn Left PAC and subscribe. You don't want to miss our Resist Project 2025 Reel series. Project 2025 will replace American values with a dangerous agenda. We must resist Project 2025. Page 204 claims that woke culture is spreading throughout the federal government, replacing values like patriotism, colorblindness, and competence with identity politics and social justice advocacy. Project 2025 seeks to dismantle progress and social justice, attacking equality and diversity under the guise of restoring traditional values. The truth is clear. Project 2025 is about fear, division, and taking away hard-won rights. We must fight back against their lies to protect the real American values of equality and justice. Saving America means standing up now and resisting Project 2025. Joining me today is Olya Makarova, who's been following these authoritarian developments closely and will help us unpack what Project 2025 is really about. So let's dive into how this dangerous agenda aims to reshape America. Welcome to the show, Olya. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, we're talking about an executive power grab here, aren't we?
Absolutely. I think it's really terrifying the way that Project 2025 really has these plans set out for Donald Trump, because previously when he came into power in 2016, there weren't many plans. They weren't expecting to win. And so when he came into power, there wasn't much of an agenda aside from overturning Roe v. Wade, because that was the big angelical agenda that had gotten them on his side and helped get him elected. But this time there is an entire playbook, and there are lists of people he wants to get into power in a way that's very troubling and very expansive, and tries to get rid of some of the protections that we really value as Americans. Now, what they're getting at here is that a lot of federal employees tend to be left-leaning because, I think when you look at the rhetoric coming out of the right, it's a bit self-explanatory, because in general, Democrats want a functioning government. They want to fund, civil servants, people working in these agencies, and yet you see that Project 2025 sees it as a problem that these people are impartial and can make up their own mind. They want to fill these positions with people who are very right-wing and will enact their ideological agenda, which is not what government agencies are meant to be doing.
Indeed. It seems that Project 2025 is aiming to give the president unprecedented control over federal departments and agencies. And it certainly looks like they want to override the normal checks and balances, making the president's agenda the only agenda.
Absolutely. And I think if we look at how Trump acted in his previous presidency, this is so terrifying, especially because, he doesn't seem to be getting better with age. And one of the things, to give a specific example, is they want to take the FBI, and which is located in the Department of Justice, and they want to basically just completely make both of those under the president's control, which is a huge problem because the Department of Justice is responsible for investigating, if the president has committed wrongdoing, as we've seen with the Trump trials. And an independent FBI feels very important, to the extent that it's fully independent of anyone leaning on its levers now. I think to see a complete overhaul of that would be really troubling, and also just feel the sort of conspiratorial thinking that is kind of an engine of the Republican Party at the moment.
The plan is to allow the president to override bureaucracy, creating a dangerous pathway towards authoritarianism. And you touched on this just now. How could removing the independence of agencies like the FBI and DOJ impact the neutrality of federal investigations?
Yeah, such an important question. I think that ultimately there aren't that many checks and balances that we have, right? The DOJ and the FBI are pretty central, especially when you're taking into account that the Supreme Court has kind of been stacked by Trump. Now, we don't know how far those conservative justices will go on Trump's behalf, but it's certainly troubling. And when we think of the wider Trump playbook of basically turning government conservative, removing the independence of these agencies, it's terrifying to think about the sort of legislation that could be enacted when, there's no check and balance at the top. And, you touched on Russ Vought. He has some really stunning quotes. Now, he is part of this group called the Center for Renewing America, which has been secretly drafting hundreds of executive orders, regulations, and memos, which would lay the groundwork for basically Trump's agenda. This is in addition to Project 2025. And this is all from a CNN interview, so, easily sourceable. And Vought has said that, 80% of his time is working on plans of what's necessary to take control of these bureaucracies, right? So they're actually disturbingly open about it. And he also discusses his plans for mass deportation if they are successful, which is currently illegal. So that is just a taste of the sort of heartbreak that the country can experience from their policies if these safeguards are removed. But honestly, there's a lot there. Yeah.
Well, wow. Yeah, indeed. It seems like the proposal outright states, like you said, the FBI and the DOJ should not operate independently. And doesn't this set up a scenario where federal investigations will be subject to political bias? And by eliminating this oversight, we're going to risk turning law enforcement into a political tool.
Yeah, it's very scary. I think that, we've already had a taste in this country of, people using their political framework to target the opposition. I mean, famously, Watergate was basically that. I mean, he didn't manage to actually swing the agencies in a huge way, but this is something that's always been a fear and should be a fear in a democracy because, ultimately, when you strengthen the executive branch, it has the power to throw everything off balance. And when you have someone like Trump in power, who's clearly very power hungry, that is a cause for concern for everyone. And now he already has bureaucrats and people who are planning on setting up a favorable bureaucracy behind him. So this kind of feels like all of the puzzle pieces you'd really need for an authoritarian takeover.
Eliminating independent oversight, this is definitely going to be turning law enforcement into a political tool. It's absolutely scary. Imagine the president being able to shut down investigations that might harm them politically. It's a dangerous slope. When we come back after the break, we're going to talk about the politicization of the civil service and federal employment.
When I ran for Congress, we flipped more Trump voters blue than any other congressional race in the country. We did this by calling out the GOP's lies and speaking truth against their $1 million attack ads. I've now partnered with Turn Left, and we're taking the fight to the extremists like Marge the Trainwreck Green, Ted Cruz, and Josh Hawley, to name a few. And I'm asking each and every one of you all to donate $25 today to the group that is absolutely helping to send these jackaloons packing. It's time to speak truth to power and turn left.
Well, this proposal aims to make the civil service more vulnerable to political purges by making it easier to fire employees. It allows for the removal of anyone who doesn't fall in line with the president's political agenda. Uh, Olia, what are the implications of making it easier to fire federal workers based on political alignment?
I mean, this is really stunning. I think it's clear why they are making such huge lists of people, right, to put into government. When they can fire so many people, they will be able to push in so many more of their people who are ideologically aligned with Trump and with the far right. And for a long time, it's been clear that the Republican Party's ambition is to effectively break the government. And I think that would probably be the likely outcome. I mean, I hate to sort of say anything too polarizing, but there is research showing that sort of Democrats are in general much smarter, more civil-minded. And when you have the new structure of the civil service where basically people are encouraged to be yes men, right? If you're allowed to be fired for your political affiliation, there is no incentive structure for critical thinking. And at the same time, the plan in Project 2025 is to also downgrade employee benefits for those who are civil service workers who work within these agencies. And it would be a salary that's much more akin to the private sector. And I think that this would definitely weaken recruitment and, again, sort of only recruit the people who are ideologically most committed to Trump. So these are disturbing developments, to say the least.
Indeed. It seems like this would undermine the very concept of merit-based government employment. It politicizes the civil service, creating an environment where loyalty to President Trump's competence or expertise. How do you think that reducing benefits and job security for federal employees will impact the overall functioning of our government agencies?
Yeah, I mean, the likely outcome is it just incentivizes everyone who's competent to find a job in the private sector, especially if there is this mass politicization going on where they're slowly watching, their friends, the people that they respect in the workplace being replaced with lackeys. I think that the scariest thing is, even if Trump doesn't succeed in his authoritarian ambitions, which seem to be to stay in power forever, but, he is old, these things take time to fix, right? You're not going to magically fire everyone who was hired under Trump. It's that would be a difficult sort of project. So, it's not only a concern during his presidency, but it's a real concern for the long-term future of these federal agencies.
It certainly seems that lowering benefits and reducing job security will severely damage morale in federal agencies. And if workers are afraid of being fired for political reasons, that's going to make it very difficult to function effectively.
Absolutely. I mean, when you remove the merit-based incentives, right, there's no real incentive to be good at your job. The real incentive is to just not be critical. And, already there are issues with government efficiency. Famously, it's not the most efficient machine we could have. And so, imagine it just like twice as bad. And this affects everything, right? This affects everything from people being able to become citizens of this country to just day-to-day functioning, like sort of highways. Obviously, this is at the federal level, but I can imagine that at the state level, there will be ambitions as well, and there will be a trickle-down effect. So, it's important that our country functions, I would say, in short, and these benefits are part of what makes it function.
Indeed. Government workers are already paid less than private sector employees, and cutting their benefits even further risks driving away talent and expertise, leaving us with an underqualified and demoralized workforce. The long-term consequences for public service will be devastating. And when we come back after the break, we're going to talk a little bit more about dismantling civil rights protections and promoting a conservative social agenda.
Today, we have an amazing show for you.
Join myself, special guests, and celebrities.
What's going on, Ice-T? Andrew Yang.
Somebody else was hopping on.
Oh, hold on.
What's going on, battle?
As we roast GQP Jackaloons.
He may not be a real businessman, but he is one hell of a con artist.
That's what it is. That's what they got indicted for. Treason and sedition. And addresses the headlines of the day.
They must be held accountable.
Live streaming every night.
I got more time in a friggin' port in a friggin' combat zone than you probably got in the military.
This is Ojeda Live.
Well, Project 2025 calls for the elimination of diversity and inclusion programs in the name of colorblind policies, which is code for rolling back protections for marginalized groups. Olya, how would scaling back civil rights enforcement and removing diversity programs affect marginalized communities and equality efforts?
Obviously it's shocking that this is the sort of step back that we can expect during the Trump presidency. And you see a lot of coded language in Project 2025, right? Sort of non-discrimination is code for let's get rid of diversity, equality, and inclusion. You see that we'll go on to discuss some of the other euphemisms a bit later on. But ultimately, you've already seen some of this happen, right? Affirmative action, race-based, essentially, discrimination in universities. And I say discrimination in the sense that these are policies which are able to take into account race to balance sort of university metrics. And that was overturned by the Supreme Court. And, I think that I'm just going to use this as an illustrative example because I think it's very interesting in this context. On the one hand, there were a lot of Asian kids who weren't accepted into Harvard, Ivy Leagues, right? Because these were top performing schools and they would have had a really, really large percentage of Asians if they didn't discriminate based on that. At the same time, affirmative action was used to lift up the amount of Black students that were there. And so in theory, you can see how overturning affirmative action could be a good thing because, it gives Asians a fair shot. But actually, what you've seen in the overturning of this policy is that Yale, Princeton, and Duke have all had lower Asian admissions since affirmative action was overturned. And what this shows us is that when you get rid of protections, it actually does take a step backwards. In general, the policies that we have, which, are relatively liberal, are already not doing a great deal to try and lift up, Black Americans, other minorities. And so when you obliterate just that whole structure, which is very much the plan in Project 2025, you're going to see a real backsliding in the country. And that is disturbing. And you've already seen some of the effects at these Ivy Leagues. So.
Yeah, it seems like by scaling back these protections, they are essentially dismantling the government's role in ensuring equal treatment in education, employment, and housing. And yes, this will just disproportionately impact communities of color, women, and LGBTQ plus individuals. What do you think the potential consequences of promoting a traditional family structure and removing gender diversity from federal programs like those in U.S. aid?
This is a really key component, and we've touched on this a little bit in our previous episode on abortion rights. But of course, these are really related discussions. You know, abortion is a fundamental right, I think, for women to be able to control their bodies. But really, there is a certain vision of how America should be structured that is conveyed in Project 2025. And it's very much the sort of nuclear family unit, which, you know, works for a lot of people, but ultimately there are many people who are gay in this country who don't want to have kids, XYZ, and they shouldn't be discriminated against. And you see in Project 2025, it's extremely explicit. They literally, a quote is, "Programs should affirm that children require and deserve both the love and nurturing of a mother and the play and protection of a father," which, like, also just so arbitrary, you know, the play of a father, like, as if women don't play with their kid, like, ridiculous, right? But, you know, also what this does is pave the way for discrimination against same-sex couples who want to adopt kids. There is a whole section on promoting fatherhood in Project 2025, which, you know, drops a little bit of kind of casual racism about sort of Black fathers leaving their kids, and also discusses sort of implementing a pro-fatherhood messaging campaign, which, like, a lot of the time, if you want to encourage families to stay together, it's really all about giving them, like, actual feasible social benefits that allow them to sort of maintain a family unit. You know, divorces are much more prevalent in lower class marriages because often money is a factor in how well a couple can gel and stay together. And there really are just a ton of stunning quotes. And I want to quote this specific. Sorry, there's a very specific quote that has is really revealing. In a section entitled "Faith-Based Protection and Policy," they discuss that they want to protect faith-based grant recipients, i.e. just like money for churches and other religious-based charitable organizations, protect faith-based grant recipients from religious liberty violations that maintain a biblically based, social science reinforced definition of marriage and family. And so you see how, as I was talking about earlier, these things that on their face are unobjectionable, like religious liberties, preserving religious liberties, right, is actually being used to weaponized in order to protect a very traditional patriarchal Christian definition of family. And, you know, obviously everyone's perfectly free to start their own patriarchal Christian family. But the point is that we want protections for the people who are gay or the people who don't want to do these things. And Project 2025 has been very, very clear that women who are seeking abortion should be monitored. You've actually just seen in South Carolina a few days ago a woman who had a miscarriage and was accused of killing her child. So, you know, these things aren't abstract. They're already happening. And it's terrifying to see the shift.
Indeed. This plan promotes the idea of the traditional family defined as a heterosexual couple while removing any support for gender diversity, reproductive rights, and LGBTQ plus families. It is indeed a blatant attempt to push conservative Christian values into public policy.
Absolutely. There's no other way to see it. I mean, it's very blatant that that's what they're doing.
Indeed. Now, programs like USAID, which focused on global gender equality, would be stripped of any references to reproductive rights or gender diversity, and this would severely undermine efforts to promote equality and support marginalized groups internationally.
Yeah. I mean, we touched on this in our abortion segment again, but they literally want to rename the Office of Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment into Women, Children, and Families, which just shows you exactly what their image of a woman's role is, right? It's tied to children and families. They also said they want to remove all references to gender, abortion, reproductive health, and sexual and reproductive rights, right? So it's very, very blatant what they're doing. You know, you only need to look at J.D. Vance's rhetoric about, you know, he said that postmenopausal women's role is to take care of children, as if they don't have the same sort of personhood as a man in his sort of 50s or 60s might do. I mean, this is a really, really anachronistic view of women and, you know, society at large. And it's ridiculous because America has a space for these people to live the way they want to live. You know, there are plenty of states that have policies that are a bit more like this, which, you know, I disagree with when it comes to abortion. But in general, America should be a place where you can live however you want to live, and trying to force the country into a sort of traditional Christian image is just ridiculous.
Absolutely. Well, that concludes our show today. This has been a deep dive into this subject, and we appreciate your expertise on the matter. Look forward to having you on the show again. Thank you so much, Olya.
Absolutely. Great to be here.
Here's the bottom line. Project 2025 is a coordinated effort to expand executive power, politicize federal employment, and roll back civil rights protections. It's a dangerous plan that threatens the very foundations of our democracy. If we don't push back now, we're setting ourselves up for an authoritarian future where only a select few have a voice. Remember, this is where we cut through the noise and break down the issues that matter. Thanks for tuning in today, and don't forget to visit turnleftpac.org. Sign up for our emails and make a donation to help keep us in the fight. And stay tuned next for Ojeda Live.